What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the reveal of the number 9 team in my 2021 NFL Power Rankings, as we are going to take a deep dive into the Seattle Seahawks here. Before we get started, a quick reminder to please do hit that like button. It really helps me out, supports the channel, helps the video get more views. Also, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications if you enjoy the deep dive. You're not going to want to miss a season preview as we count down to the number 1 team in my power rankings. But the Seattle Seahawks here, coming in at number 9, they are a team that has made a lot of changes, and changes that Seahawks fans are hoping are going to be for the better. And more specifically, there's been a very steady flow of criticism directed towards Pete Carroll, as potentially the game has passed him by in a lot of ways. Not that he's a bad head coach. That's, no one's ever said that. It's just that the game has changed. It's a much more passing-oriented league, and Pete Carroll has had kind of the same philosophies here for a long time, as far as leaning towards running the ball and playing defense and being a little bit more on the conservative end. And there's been a lot of things you can point to say that maybe has held this team back. And certainly that could still be here, and it could be true that the game has passed Pete Carroll by, as he's now over 70 years old. But there's also a lot of reasons to be excited and kind of philosophical changes that this team is making, whether it's the scheme or some of the different things that they've done here, that I'm excited to break down, and could be reasons that maybe the Seahawks can go from perennial playoff contender, which they've been for all of Russell Wilson's career. He's one of those rare quarterbacks that it really doesn't matter what else is going on. They're going to be a team that's winning 10, 11 games and in the playoff mix year after year after year, just as they've shown. But expectations are higher than that when you have a quarterback like Russell Wilson, and they haven't been able to really elevate the bar there. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why maybe that could be the case here in Seattle, because I don't expect a lot of controversial comments here, or at least pushback on them as the number 9 team. This is going to be much more about can they elevate that ceiling and not just make the playoffs, but go on that Super Bowl run and get back to what they want to do, winning championships in Seattle. And that's going to start with the key departures and key additions here for the offseason. Just some minor departures, I would say. Brian Schottenheimer, potentially addition by subtraction. That's going to be the big philosophical change that this team is making, is they're going to go from more of that old school pro style offense, or at least philosophy, to now the modern Shanahan wide zone offense implemented by Shane Waldron coming in from the LA Rams. A lot of reasons to be excited about how that scheme is going to fit with Russell Wilson, which we'll talk about when we get to the quarterback portion here. But Jerron Reed is going to be on the way out here, a good pass rusher for them, and something they'll have to replace, but not a superstar by any stretch of the imagination. KJ Wright on his way out. They've been drafting linebackers there, knowing that eventually they were going to let KJ Wright go, and he could still come back, but I think they're ready to see him out the door. And then Shaquille Griffin, probably the biggest personnel loss for this team, as it's going to add a lot of question marks at that cornerback position. It's not that Griffin's been a star there, but he's been their best guy quite easily. So we'll detail all of those departures and who could potentially be stepping up. But the other additions here, it is a pretty nice list of just good players. They bring in Gabe Jackson to beef up the O-line. That was partially Russell Wilson speaking up and potentially having his voice be heard a little bit more here, getting that O-line a little bit, some more investment in that group. They bring in Dwayne Eskridge. The offense here coming over from the Rams, they felt like they needed a third receiver. We'll talk about him. Gerald Everett as well coming over with Shane Waldron. So some added playmakers to this group. And then the defensive line adding some pieces with Aldon Smith, who almost immediately got into more legal troubles. That's a major question mark on if he's going to be available for this team, but they did sign him. Kerry Hyder, a nice scheme fit as that big body defensive end. They do get Al Woods, good run defending nose tackle, back from opt-out. They bring in Pierre Desir, Akello Witherspoon, some guys with starting cornerback experience, and then Marquise Blair, who was injured in the second game of the year last year, comes back to compete for reps in that secondary. So really not losing any superstars, not truly gaining any superstars either, but I think it's safe to say a net positive as far as what this team accomplished this offseason, and some philosophical changes, certainly, with the changing of the guard at offensive coordinator. So we're going to go through this whole roster. We're going to rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league, but that is going to start with the quarterback room, where they rank third in the NFL under Russell Wilson. And this isn't going to be, something to really debate. It's pretty consensus that Russ is the third best quarterback in the NFL. He just hasn't had that even one full season of playing at that MVP level, the Rodgers, Mahomes level, but he's also kind of a tier above, I would say, every other quarterback in the NFL. As you look at like Allen and Watson, they just haven't been doing it year in, year out like Russ has. And Russ is one of, let's just say, 3 to 5 quarterbacks in the NFL that, depending on how you feel about Allen's consistency moving forward and Deshaun Watson's situation, I think those would be the 5. Russ is one of the 3 to 5 quarterbacks in the NFL that it doesn't even really matter what the rest of your team looks like. You should expect to be in the playoffs and competing for a Super Bowl because that man is your quarterback. And that's what Russell Wilson brings to the table here. Now, you look at his season last year, and for the first half of the year, he was at that level and frankly was approaching Mahomes, Rodgers level and was matching them for the first half of the year. It was a kind of a neck-and-neck MVP race until the second half of the year arrived, where, for whatever reason, it could have been Pete Carroll getting uncomfortable or bad weather or Russ just himself dropping off in his play. We saw him kind of look like a completely different player, and the Seahawks playing at a completely different style. My theory is Pete Carroll got really uncomfortable with the way those game scripts were shaking down. Because yes, Russ was incredible, and there was a lot of times where they did win games because of Russell Wilson, but this was also a team that did not have the defense equipped to get into those shootouts, paired with the philosophy of Pete Carroll, where he's just not comfortable in those game scripts where you go out there knowing you need to score a touchdown or you're probably going to lose a game late in the game. And they completely changed their approach. They started running the ball better and running the ball more, and in turn starting playing more defense. And I think just for Pete Carroll as the head coach, that was his comfort zone. Now, that's not a high upside approach here. Reining in Russell Wilson, leaning on a average run game and a defense that just doesn't have the personnel to support that as a Super Bowl team. And I think perhaps this year we're going to see some changes. I know we are, because they've now changed their offensive coordinator to do what so many teams with quarterbacks with skill sets similar to Russell Wilson have made this change to the Shanahan wide zone offense, bringing in Shane Waldron. And I cannot wait to see what Russell Wilson looks like. If you were to pick a scheme for Russell Wilson, this is it. Bootlegs, play action, and the opportunity to really launch the ball deep and maximize his ability with that vertical accuracy. You could make some parallels to his skill set to Ryan Tannehill or Baker Mayfield, who have thrived in this system. But I like the parallel much better to Aaron Rodgers, or what the Niners with this offense are looking for in Trey Lance, or what the Rams are looking for in Matthew Stafford, where you pair this system with an actually really uber athletic or elite quarterback. That's when you get Aaron Rodgers' MVP season and one of the more efficient passing years ever. And you also put that with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Dwayne Eskridge, Gerald Everett. Russell Wilson could finally get that MVP season and more importantly, get more week-to-week stability and a scheme that just is so perfect for Russell Wilson's skill set. So it's going to be fun to watch him really get married with the right scheme and potentially get back into that elite top-tier quarterback convo, because right now I think Mahomes and Rodgers are kind of alone, but there was glimpses of maybe thinking Russ would have entered that last year until things tapered off. It is all about Russ here. You've got Geno Smith, Alex McGough. You don't want to get to that. This roster is not talented enough to support those two as your quarterback. So exciting things potentially ahead for Russell Wilson. I have high expectations for what he's going to bring to the table, and we'll continue to preview this offense, but I do think under this scheme, this has potential to be one of the best offenses in the NFL. Then the running back situation, it's a very good running back room. You have Chris Carson. They bring him back. Typical bruising style. Is maybe a lesser scheme fit in the wide zone approach. He really has been a power run fit here. Just bang them between the tackles, fight for tough yardage. And it's not like they only run outside zone in this system. But I will say, speed, getting the edge, not necessarily Chris Carson's biggest strong suit, but we've seen guys like Chubb and Henry who are faster, but not like uber speedy types, also have success in this system. So I still think Carson can have a good year, but the guy I would really look to is Rashad Penny. There's reports that he's healthy and is primed for, I guess, a breakout season, or at least to show why the Seahawks spent a first-round pick on him. And I try not to look too much into preseason hype, but I do believe it. He's still a young player. Yes, he was overdrafted, and Seahawks probably shouldn't have spent a first-round pick on a running back and all that stuff, but he was incredibly talented coming out of college, and more specifically, his straight-line speed at his size. Yes, he's lost a little weight, but that 220-pound guy with massive speed, it's not Derrick Henry, but it is somewhat reminiscent from a skill set perspective as far as that speed-trained type of runner. And in the outside zone running game, he has incredible potential to be maximized. He's just another player here that could be elevated by a Shanahan-style offense being brought in here. And I would say similar things about DJ Dallas. Both those guys have some speed, but they take a little bit of time to get up to that speed. And we've talked about how with Derrick Henry, his slow acceleration actually at times helps him hit home runs in the running game because these guys starting slow, it's counterintuitive, but it actually helps the blockers set up those blocks on the edge because the running back just naturally isn't outrunning the blocks. So I'm excited for Rashad Penny. If he can stay healthy, which has been what's really held him back, I think he could show a lot and get to a point where this is a healthy 1-2 punch and a really explosive running game here. So keep an eye on Rashad Penny for a potential breakout season. It's a little bit late to predict it, but I do actually feel strangely confident in what we're going to see from him. You have some good backups as well. Travis Homer, a little bit more of a scat back style, maybe a receiving backup, and Alex Collins, they bring him back. I think you're looking at those top 4 guys making the team, and Collins more of a camp runner. But they rank 15th, very smack dab in the middle for the running back room, and certainly could get into the top 10 if Rashad Penny can reach that unbelievable high potential that he had coming out of college. Then the receiving room, they rank 13th, and it's a very thin group outside of your top 2, but those top 2 are phenomenal. It's crazy how almost all of these Shanahan offenses seem to have just 2 receivers, and that's like it. Tennessee, Minnesota, for example, you got 2 really nice high-end starting receivers, and then it just drops off. Part of that is these guys do like a lot of 12 personnel, but with the Rams' influences here with Shane Waldron, you also bring in Dwayne Eskridge to go 11 personnel. It's a little bit different with how the Rams do things in that way. Anyway, DK Metcalf, to me, is this team's number 1 receiver heading into next season. And in this scheme, I mean, crossing routes, posts, corners, go balls, two-way goes. That's like, I don't want to say all DK Metcalf can do, but that's what he does at an elite level. He's not a guy that dials it down and, shows a ton of wiggle in his routes. It's not his game. But what he does in those routes that I just described, he is elite and uncoverable. Legit high-end 4.3 speed at 6'4", and an absolute monster. Just a physical specimen. You can't press him because he's just going to throw you off of him. The only corner in the NFL that has the physical traits to even match what DK Metcalf can do is Jalen Ramsey. Unfortunately, he's in this division. But as long as he's not seeing Jalen Ramsey, he's pretty much going to dominate on physical traits alone because no one else has the technique, size, and speed to match DK Metcalf. So in this offense especially, he was great last year, but I think they're going to maximize DK Metcalf. So have kind of the three layers there, quarterback, receiver, and running backs with potentially Rashad Penny kind of getting elevated by this scheme in a lot of ways. Tyler Lockett also, he's going to be kind of that route runner type for this offense. A big part of the Shanahan concepts, which if you're not familiar, a lot of this is going to be play action boots that are designed to look like an outside zone run game. And usually that means you're going to have a crossing route or a deep cross and then some sort of a post or corner option to layer on top of that crossing route. And really these are designed to get guys wide open deep down the field. And obviously Russell Wilson is going to be really good at hitting those guys. But you also have two receivers here that are very good at those things. And with Tyler Lockett, you have an added benefit in a guy that is a great deep threat. He can track the ball at a high level, but it's another layer to this offense, and you see this a lot in Green Bay that runs this offense. It's another layer when you have Devontae Adams who can fake the post, stop on a dime, and turn it into a corner route because then all of the communication breaks down in the secondary, and it just adds a whole nother layer to these concepts that is so uncoverable. So to have a guy like Tyler Lockett, this is something Justin Jefferson can do for the Vikings, something Corey Davis did really well for the Titans last year. Metcalf, probably not a guy you want running those specific routes where you're faking a post and turning it into a corner route, but Tyler Lockett absolutely can be that guy. So you have perfect skill sets for the Shanahan wide zone vertical passing game here. Then you have Dwayne Eskridge. This is where I think you're going to see a lot of those McVay influences with Shane Waldron. And the Rams have run this scheme, of course, but it's a little bit different. The influences are there, obviously, but they do run a lot more 11 personnel. And that's where you needed Dwayne Eskridge, who actually is a nice fit here as a little bit more of the toy for the offensive coordinator. Jet sweeps, bubble screens, short crossing routes, just different creative ways to get a guy like this the ball. And he also has the ability to go deep and track the ball and be that vertical threat in all of the same ways that Lockett and Metcalf are. So I understood the pick. Was it a little bit early for me? Yeah, but Eskridge does really fit what they need for that spot, so I understand it. It's just a matter of seeing it play out. And for him to be your third option in his rookie season, I don't have huge expectations for him, but there's probably going to be some nice flashes there. And if he has a good year, I'm not going to be all that surprised, but we'll just have to wait and see on that front. You got Freddie Swain, who I kind of like as a fourth receiver to kind of sit and develop and continue to grow here. He has really fluid movement skills. He's a half-decent backup to Tyler Lockett. So him as a fourth, I think, is okay. And then it's a wide-open competition behind that. You got Penny Hart, who you can throw into this lump of 5'7", 5'8" receivers that I keep mentioning in these deep dives, a trend that's picking up in the NFL with smaller receivers potentially working out. Probably a position battle there between John Ursua and Cade Johnson, two kind of slot types coming out over the last couple of years. Cade Johnson was a better prospect, even if he was not drafted, whereas Ursua was a 7th-round pick. Probably going to be hype for Johnson to win that 6th wide receiver spot. And then that's probably it. I liked Thompson coming out of Toledo, but he's done nothing. Fuller, interesting player, but drop issues. So probably looking at Hart potentially making this team as a kick returner. If not, Ursua, Johnson, Fuller. It doesn't really matter. Then we have the tight end group here. I do think that Gerald Everett wins out the primary receiving tight end role here. I understand Will Dissly's kind of a fan favorite there, but just doesn't have the skill set to really thrive in this offense. A key trait for a tight end in this offense is the ability to kind of separate and run away from linebackers on crossing routes. And Dissly just doesn't have that in his repertoire, but he is a fantastic run blocker. and is going to add to the run game here, absolutely. And he has a steady pair of hands and a good tight end too. But when I look at Gerald Everett, he is very much a poor man's Jonnu Smith, and it's not like he's a super poor man's Jonnu Smith. They're actually fairly similar. The main difference is Gerald Everett has been splitting reps with Higbee there for the Rams. So going from competing with Disley to Higbee, I guess, for Gerald Everett, but I do like the scheme fit, and he's a guy that in fantasy football is ranked way too low. If Everett has a top 10 tight end season as far as production goes, it's not gonna surprise me. I mean, he is the ideal scheme fit. Waldron obviously spoke up for this guy, and they have plans for him. So I love his fit here, kind of adding some more explosiveness. Him as a third option, again, very similar to the Vikings. He's very Irv Smith-esque as well. Most of these guys in this offense, whether it's Irv Smith or Jonnu Smith or Josiah DeGuara, a lot of them are like 6'3", and Everett's no different there. Colby Parkinson being the third tight end there, kind of a oversized receiver type. Hopefully he's worked on his blocking. I can't imagine anybody else there emerges as the tight end 3, but a good red zone threat. I liked Colby Parkinson. I could see him continuing to grow here, though he doesn't have much of a role this season, I don't think. Really, I'm not familiar with the rest of the guys there behind Parkinson. And then the running back room, these guys are all okay in the receiving game. I don't get overly excited about any of them, but it's fine. So they rank 13th. You got options, and most importantly, you have scheme fits, which is always an underrated aspect, finding ways to maximize player skill sets. And I think between Metcalf, Lockett, and Everett, these guys are going to have really nice seasons. I do believe that. Then the offensive line, it's okay. They rank 24th. I will say this is probably the best offensive line that Russell Wilson has had since, I guess, his like Super Bowl teams. It's been a rough run of offensive line, and I'm glad to see him speak up and use his leverage as one of the game's top quarterbacks to kind of get a voice in what's happening, because that does seem to be what happened with the Gabe Jackson acquisition. Russell Wilson was speaking up in a lot of ways like Rodgers has been over the last couple months, and they go and get Gabe Jackson, and all of a sudden Russ was happy. So that, to me, feels like what that was kind of about. And it was a nice move, because that right guard spot was looking real shaky, and now it's solidified with a good veteran in Gabe Jackson. But you got your tackle situation there. It's good, I would just say. There's some question marks to throw out there. I know Dwayne Brown is kind of fighting for his contract situation. It makes sense up there at his age, but he's continuing to play at a really high level. I would say keep an eye on that situation. The Seahawks, you don't want to lose Dwayne Brown, but I will say at his age, a new scheme, a scheme that really emphasizes the ability to move block as a tackle with those wide zone run games and the moving pockets. That's not really Dwayne Brown's skill set. He is a traditional pass-setting left tackle. Could be due for a little bit of regression inside this scheme, especially at his age. So it's a situation to keep an eye on, but I imagine they will work it out. They kind of have to, because they have nothing to lean on after that. The right tackle is also okay, Brandon Shell. He's a good player when he's in there. Now, you could say some of the same stuff schematically. He's kind of more that big, mauling, anchoring type of right tackle, not the most mobile guy for this wide zone blocking scheme. But that's not even so much a worry for me. It's much more about health with me with Brandon Shell, where he's never been able to really finish a whole season. So that's another situation to keep an eye on. I would just say there's question marks with the tackles, even though when healthy and in there, it's a good tackle duo. And then at center, Ethan Pocic, very low-end starter / kind of replacement level depth, I suppose. He was okay last year. A mobile guy, and in this offense, a new scheme fit might bode well for him and more continued development there. He's not a bad player, but not ideal, certainly. And then the guard situation's pretty good. Gabe Jackson's just a good, balanced player. Still not an ideal scheme fit. He's not the quickest guard. He's more of that big, mauling, inside zone style guy. So that will be something to keep an eye on is if the O-line is the correct scheme fit, with a lot of these guys being kind of plotting types. I will say Damian Lewis is kind of the ideal scheme fit if you look at these guys. Almost an identical player to Nate Davis in Tennessee, where really athletic guy, phenomenal run blocker, but some of the biggest splits between pass protection and run blocking that you can find was a steal of a draft pick for this team, and a guy that is trending upwards. But just as I said, for him coming out of LSU, I think he was one of my top guards, certainly in the top 5, and I loved the pick. But I did have some serious questions about his pass protection. I thought his footwork was extremely clunky and needed a lot of work, but also just a guy that wasn't comfortable moving backwards, much more comfortable moving forwards. Well, in this scheme, he's almost always going to be moving forwards, or at least going to be on the move and not moving backwards, because you're going to see a lot more moving pockets where he has incredible get-off and mobility for such a strong player. So could be a nice scheme fit there with Damian Lewis, even if as a pass protector, he might be one of the worst starting guards in the league in a traditional sense. But another player here where the scheme is going to maximize those strengths and minimize those weaknesses. As far as the depth goes, it's depth. It's O-line depth. Cedric Ogbuehi is an athletic guy, and in this system could be okay, and he actually filled in for Brandon Shell last year. So he could actually be trending upwards. He has been far from a fan favorite here, but keep an eye on him. Stone Forsythe is a nice Band-Aid pick in the 6th round. He's a guy with really nice technique and anchor and pass protection ability. Not a mobile guy, not a good scheme fit, but if you have to get to Stone Forsythe because Brandon Shell gets injured, he can hang in and be a decent rookie. I just don't see a lot of upside in Stone Forsythe, but definitely a good value in the 6th round to get a guy like that. Jamarco Jones, a good athlete. Keep an eye on him in a new scheme here. Phil Haynes has played okay when he's been in there, which has been very limited. But that's really it. Jordan Simmons played a bunch last year. That was hard to watch, and that's really all that's worth mentioning here. It's not a good offensive line, but it's better than it's been, and I would say is going to be a group that can at least allow this team to do what they want to do, which would be an upgrade from last year where they were really a unit that got in the way of letting this team do what they want to do, but probably not a group that helps them do what they want to do, if that makes sense. So the offense as a whole ranks 7th for me. This is one of the best offenses in the NFL. It's not just Russ, but Russ is a huge part of it. I have a lot of confidence in the new scheme. They're going to rank 18th, which is pretty high for a brand new kind of offensive coaching staff, but for the most part, I honestly can't think of an example where a team adapts this scheme and it's not an immediate upgrade, and especially with a quarterback like Russell Wilson, I think they hit the ground running, and Shane Waldron could quickly become an emerging head coach candidate, whether it's here in Seattle. We could have a Kyle Shanahan, Dan Quinn situation developing right in front of our face here. But that's something to be optimistic for, I think, is the adaptation of the new scheme. But you also have explosive receivers, a great scheme fit. You got a good running game. You have an O-line that's going to run block at a high level, and hopefully this scheme can actually create some better pass protection and utilize some of that mobility from Russell Wilson a lot better. So I thought that the move to a Shanahan offense was genius here. They see it a lot in this division with the Niners and the Rams, and should be a really nice transition for the Seahawks. And if they're going to make a Super Bowl run this year, that to me is the reason, is this becomes one of the 3 best offenses in the NFL, and Shane Waldron emerges as a new kind of offensive guru in the league. But now we, I guess, have to talk about this defense. It's not good. The talent here, it's one of the least talented defenses in the entire NFL. You've got a couple superstar players in the mix here, but for the most part, you're looking at low-end starters hoping to be elevated by Pete Carroll, who, again, has the game passed up his defense. It very well could be the case here. We've seen it for a couple years now. It just has not been a good defense. But let's get through it. It's that might be a slightly pessimistic preview. There's some stuff to be optimistic about here. The run defense ranks 18th. This is a team that plays a very physical brand of football, and they have depth up front, and I don't think they're going to be getting gashed constantly. But they also don't have high-end bodies outside of Bobby Wagner and I guess Jamal Adams to really shut down the run. You look up front, it's really Poona Ford and Al Woods who are good run-defending defensive tackles. I guess I don't have any complaints about that, but again, not dominant players. And then the interior defensive line depth is right up there with the worst in the league. LJ Collier, I project to be a full-time interior player moving forward. By the way, this front could very well see some more 3-4 looks, which is something to keep an eye on. You know, Pete Carroll and this defense has been very stubborn to be a 4-3 for a long time, but you look at the personnel here with Kerry Hyder and Collier and Rasheem Green. 3-4 does make a lot of sense in a lot of ways, and that would also explain Darrell Taylor getting some more reps at linebackers. So I do hear that, Seahawks fans, but similar to what we said about the Dallas Cowboys, Seahawks have been a 4-3 defense for as long as I can remember, and I'm going to list them as such until I see them make a full conversion to 3-4, though a 3-4 conversion could make sense. Just going to throw that out there, but LJ Collier, he just has still so far to go. Was a bust of a first-round pick, but there's still some potential there. As the first guy off the bench, I would hate it in run defense, but as a pass rusher, we will continue to talk about him. Brian Moan showed very minimal flashes last year, but he's there. Robert Krumdiche getting some hype. I'll believe it when I see it with him. This is a guy that has shown almost no work ethic since he got into the league, so again, believe it when I see it on him. I understand there's some hype there, but not going to count on that. Super thin interior defensive line group up front. Certainly doesn't help the run defense. The edge depth is there. There's a lot of different bodies here. None of these guys are dominant, but they bring in Kerry Hyder, who definitely fits that Michael Bennett early down edge player. Maybe slides inside a little bit more on later downs, but probably their best run defender on the edge there, Kerry Hyder. Decent little signing. Has been an underrated player in this league for a long time. As just a high-effort, high-motor player with weird physical traits that no one's really wanted to, highly invest in. But everywhere he's been a good player, and I don't see that changing here. Alton Robinson, I guess, being the other early down starter. They really liked to keep Dunlap fresh on early downs as the season went on last year, and I think at his age, they will continue to do so. And it's not like Dunlap's been an elite run defender. And Alton Robinson was the guy that really stepped in down the stretch and looked good. And that was one of my draft takes last year, was that I thought Alton Robinson, who they spent a 5th-round pick on, was a much better prospect than Darrell Taylor, who they spent a 2nd-rounder on. Now, I know health has been an issue for Taylor, but Robinson definitely looked like a good draft pick for this team in the 5th round, which is good news for a team that's gotten a lot of criticism for their drafts lately. But I did like that pick, and he's a great scheme fit as that bigger-bodied edge player, and had one of the more fun draft write-ups on Alton Robinson that I've had, whereas he's a physical freak, and he looks like a powerful rusher. But on my draft write-up coming into the 2020 draft, I said Alton Robinson needs to learn how to play like the 265-pound defensive end that he is, and not play like the 235-pound speed rusher that he thinks he is. And we saw that in Seattle. Pete Carroll get that out of him almost immediately. And if that's the case, he could be a good starting edge player. So there's some trending up there with Alton Robinson. Now, he's got to kind of beat the rest of these guys out. Benson Mayo is a good veteran. Carlos Dunlap will be in the mix because of what he offers as a pass rusher. You're going to have potentially Aldon Smith in the mix there. Sticky situation there with yet another off-the-field dilemma for him. Man. Rasheem Green kind of getting buried here at this point, but still has some potential as a bigger-bodied run defender on the edge. And then Darrell Taylor, almost an afterthought already. Again, they're kind of experimenting with him as a linebacker, apparently. To me, that screams 3-4 front early down work as a outside linebacker there. So I guess keep an eye on that. Linebackers here, Bobby Wagner, still in the conversation for the best linebacker in the NFL. It's difficult to kind of pinpoint who that is, but Wagner still playing. honestly at the peak of his power, still has plenty of speed, even if he isn't quite the monster, borderline best defensive player in the NFL, not named Aaron Donald level impact that he once was. He's still super smart, super fast, a full-size linebacker that you can't say about a lot of guys these days. Still bringing everything to the table and is a leader there in the run defense as well. But he unlike Kendricks, a Warner, a David, a Darius Leonard, Bobby Wagner is a full-size dude, north of 240 pounds. That helps him thump and be a legitimate between the tackles stud in the run defense. So he's the best thing going for them in run defense, and he offers that sideline-to-sideline speed. But they also bring Jordan Brooks in, who also has that thumping ability. Very good here at finding those 240-pound guys that can also run sideline-to-sideline. So Jordan Brooks definitely trending upwards, looked really good in the second half of last season, and the fact that they haven't signed KJ Wright yet, I think bodes very well for Jordan Brooks in his sophomore season. Again, was a first-round pick last year, so they have high expectations for him, maybe even to eventually take Bobby Wagner's job. But this year, I think he's taking KJ Wright's job as that linebacker next to Bobby Wagner. I will say I still have questions about his ability to move backwards and cover space and be that cover player. That's going to be the next step in his game, but I feel very good about what he's going to bring in run defense. So the linebackers are exceptional run defenders. You also have Cody Barton, who has size and speed, a player I liked, was a third-round pick. They've invested in these linebackers here. Ben Burke-Irvin's going to compete with Cody Barton there as that third linebacker. And then you got to mention Jamal Adams. He gets too much criticism. He's almost becoming underrated. Yes, he's a unique style of safety and struggled in coverage last year, but he's still an elite impact in this front seven. And as far as sideline-to-sideline speed and not giving up big runs, you've got Brooks, Wagner, and Adams there. It's tough to get past that second level of this run defense. They might be getting beat a little bit more up front, but they're also not going to give up a lot of big plays, and when you have an offense this good, that could bode well. But now the pass rush, this is by far the biggest weakness of this team, and it was last year as well. It felt like they just could not manufacture a pass rush naturally. That's where you got Jamal Adams basically playing edge rusher here now. He's a unique player that isn't really going to make the graphic here, but as a blitzer, Jamal Adams is a factor, but you don't really want that. You want Jamal Adams back there covering and being an impact back there like he was for the Jets just a year ago. And I can only speculate here, but I imagine they're going to blitz him a lot less this year and hopefully can get a little bit more from these guys up front. You get a full season of Carlos Dunlap now. He was a good player for them, and he's up there in age, but he's still a good number 2 rusher. Unfortunately, they don't have a number 1 guy, but you can still probably get a good 40, 45 pressures from Dunlap, which is more than they've been able to say about really anybody here since Michael Bennett left. So that's nice, and I do think he plays more of a later down rotational role to keep him fresh. You've got all those other bodies to, eat up those run defense snaps early on. And then Alton Robinson is another kind of wild card there on the other side. Right now, I have him slotted as the starter just because the Aldon Smith situation's a mess. If they are able to get Aldon Smith back on the field, which I have no idea, man. This guy just cannot stay out of trouble. He did it for 1 year last year, and obviously I hope he gets things taken care of and can get back on the field. And that'd be big for the Seahawks, and that would really help them get away from Jamal Adams blitzing all the time. But it's impossible to count on that. So for me, I think Alton Robinson is the best kind of 3-down edge that they have. You're going to have Kerry Hyder getting in the mix there, Benson Mayoa, so some veteran options that can be a part of a rotation. Rasheem Green not offering much. Darrell Taylor I have no expectations for. I did think he was a reach, and I just haven't seen anything from him. So it's a complex group and a big rotation. Dunlap's really the only stable force, with Robinson and Smith kind of being wild cards there. On the interior, it's really poor. Poona Ford is going to be out there for a lot of pass rushing downs. He has good get-off and can occasionally have some highlights getting after the quarterback, but just no consistency there. He is like 5'11", so I don't think he comes in with much of a plan. He just kind of comes in low and tries to, blow stuff up. LJ Collier is the really, pivot point as far as this being a functional interior rush, because I do think he plays more of a full-time interior role for this defense, and especially on later downs. First-round pick there, LJ Collier. They need to get something from him. As you can see, this depth chart is just not very good. I guess keep an eye on Robert Kondiche, but if LJ Collier really can't get you anything, you're going to have to move Kerry Hyder into that 3 technique spot, and he's okay, but it's just not a lot of upside and explosiveness there. So it's not a good pass rush, very clearly. It ranks 30th in the NFL. There's some upside there. If Alton Smith plays, you bring Adams in there for some special packages. If LJ Collier can take somewhat of a step up, maybe it can be a little bit more functional. But I would say that this pass rush is going to be a problem for this team, and especially when you get in the playoffs against some of the quarterbacks they're going to play in the NFC. Ooh, boy, could be more of the same with that pass rush. Then the linebackers, we already covered these guys quite a bit, but they do rank 4th for me. Wagner is in that top 4 group, whichever order you want to go with there, with Kendricks, David, Wagner, and Warner. It's fine by me, but he's certainly still up there and really didn't show too many signs of slowing down there at his age, which is really impressive. Jordan Brooks, I really like what he brings to the table as a run defender. But again, as a cover player and a young linebacker, I just think he has so much to prove, and I'm honestly not even expecting too much from him in coverage. But they do put a lot of pressure on these linebackers to cover well, and losing KJ Wright, that's a big part there, is getting Jordan Brooks to see the field better, being able to drop into those hook zones and take away the middle of the field. And I would say that is a question mark for me, though he is trending upwards, and I'm definitely not going to necessarily bet against him. We just haven't really seen too much coverage ability from him going back to college and now in the pros as a rookie. Cody Barton is an interesting prospect as well. I think he has upside in his own right. That is not a KJ Wright pun, but similar kind of style with the size and some coverage IQ there from Barton. So not entirely writing him off, but it does seem to be Brooks's number 2 job to lose right now. But deep down the road, if this is a linebacking group of Brooks and Barton, not going to be the least bit surprised there. They've developed these guys really well. And then Ben Burke-Irvin, don't write him off either. He is more of that undersized weak side linebacker, but really good flashes in coverage. Was a steal of a 5th-round pick, in my opinion. And it's a crowded room right now, but down the road, this team, over the last few years, has liked to stay in base a little bit longer than most teams. So if those 3 linebackers are relevant players for this linebacking group for years to come, really will not be surprised. But the depth after that is non-existent, unless Darrell Taylor is a linebacker now, I guess. I don't know. Just going off reports, but that's obviously not expecting anything there. And then the secondary, where they rank 22nd, they have some depth, and they do a decent job to make sure these guys don't get obliterated, but you really don't have any high-end cover players here in the secondary at all. Kello Witherspoon, there's a ton of hype for this guy. I got criticism for really not saying he's a starting caliber player in my cornerback rankings video. He was for the last month of last season. He hasn't been for the 2 years before that and the 14 weeks of football before the last month of last season. So wildly inconsistent career, but in theory a good scheme fit here with the Seattle 3 defense. And there's a lot of expectations for him to be this team's alpha corner. And, I could see a world where he's about as good as Shaquille Griffin, sure. But that's still not an elite corner by any stretch of the imagination. Trey Flowers as CB2. What's going on here? Open your eyes, Seattle. He's their 5th best corner, maybe 6th, with Trey Brown coming in here. He stinks. He's probably the slowest and stiffest corner out there on the field. Right there in the conversation with Kevin King, in my opinion, for the worst starting cornerback currently in the NFL. So if they play him, it's just going to be another situation of like, why? What are we doing here, Seattle? Like, open your eyes. It was like, for a while, it was sticking with base too long, not using a nickel corner. Now it's Trey Flowers. get him off the field. Even Pierre Desir is better than him, but DJ Reed was really good on the outside there. I thought that was a big step for them to take a 5'9" cornerback and stick him on the outside in a defense that's traditionally had a strict 6-foot cutoff at that cornerback position. The only reason they've been playing Trey Flowers is because he's got long arms and he's tall. That's it. DJ Reed's a much better player in every stretch of the imagination. So for Seahawks fans, you're praying to God that this staff wakes up, plugs in DJ Reed as the number 2 corner, and then you have Ugo Amadi in the slot competing with Trey Brown, who's a really scrappy, quick, athletic pick out of Oklahoma. Not unlike DJ Reed, is a guy that can actually step outside and surprise you with his ability to play on the perimeter, despite being, 5'10", 5'11". So I liked that pick. And then Pierre Desir is just a veteran who's played in this system sporadically, I would just say. He's been a starter on and off throughout his career, and it's kind of emergency depth there. But if you go to him, I do think it's better than, if you bench Trey Flowers and go to Pierre Desir, I at least think that's an upgrade, even though it's not great. So there's 6 guys there. Are they going to use them correctly? We'll find out. Do I feel good about it? No, not really, but there is a world where Witherspoon gets some of his potential realized, becomes a high-end number 2 caliber player. DJ Reed steps in, and then Ugo Amadi and Trey Brown battle it out in the slot, and you get an okay group of corners. That's a very optimistic projection here. If there's anybody else here to keep an eye on, I guess Brian Mills, who is an athletic developmental corner prospect. Don't see him taking any of these players' jobs, but do keep an eye on him as a guy with speed, length, and potential. A decent undrafted pickup there for the Seahawks for a team that didn't have really any draft picks. I thought he was a draftable player. I will say the safety group is pretty nice. You got Jamal Adams, who is underrated at this point. He's only a year away from being one of the premium safeties in the league, and not this laughing stock edge linebacker hybrid that he was last year. It's another player that Seattle needs to learn how to utilize in a better way, but also battled injury last year, was learning a new scheme. I think it's almost inevitable that Jamal Adams plays at a higher level. I do think they pay him a ton of money, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets about $20 million here. It does complicate things that he wasn't all that good last year, but they gave up a couple of first-round picks to get this player. He is, at the peak of his powers, a legitimate elite NFL defensive player, and just does everything and wears so many hats. And we're not that far removed from Cam Chancellor here, being that same caliber player in a similar role. So they have to reopen their imagination and get him more involved in the coverage game, which he's more than capable of doing, and showing better consistency than he showed last year. And I think he gets there, but again, he was not a good cover player for them last year. So it's something to talk about. But then Quandre Diggs next to him, maybe even a little overrated, next to the underrated Jamal Adams. He's a good starting free safety. He is a ball-hawking style, but is also out of position very consistently. So, kind of a risk-taking free safety with some range, a guy that'll come up and pop you in the mouth. He is a highlight reel player. I get why Seahawks fans like him, but people want this to be in the conversation for the best safety duo in the NFL. It's really not with Quandre Diggs there. He's a good starting free safety, and that's about it. Very polarizing guy week to week. Marquise Blair comes back here. He suffered a pretty gruesome injury in week 2 last year. Definitely a player with upside. I thought he was very similar to Julian Blackmon coming out as that free safety out of Utah. Has some range, has some downhill, kind of pop you in the mouth style. Just a good safety prospect that hasn't quite worked out yet, but I'm not ready to write off Marquise Blair quite yet. Neal has gotten a lot of reps as kind of the 6th defensive back in here, whether it's in the slot, free safety, strong safety. They do bring in Demarius Randall, who fits a similar kind of former corner safety hybrid style that they have with a lot of these safeties. Just very similar to Quandre Diggs at a much lower level. A risk taker, a good athlete, a guy that has had some high-end moments, but the consistency is really bad on Demarius Randall's side. And then Crosswell there has gotten some hype, undrafted rookie out of Arizona State. So I guess keep an eye on him to make the team here. So 22nd in the secondary. I don't see a world where this is a huge strength, but they have some bodies. I don't think they get obliterated necessarily, but I don't see a lot of lockdown coverage here, certainly. So as we wrap up here, the defense overall ranks 22nd, which is, I guess, a little better than it was last year. I think they make some adjustments. You get better play from Jamal Adams. Pass rush may be slightly improved, but there's just not a lot of elite talent and difference making in this defense. Your two best players are arguably the least valuable positions at linebacker and safety. Not that those guys can't make impacts, because they can, but just as far as like wins above replacement and making that high-end impact, you're looking at pass rushers, corners, free safeties, interior defensive linemen. Those are the more valuable positions. They don't have good players at those spots, and we saw last year that be a problem for them. The defensive coaching, it's still very good. It's kind of still Pete Carroll's defense, but Ken Norton, they're, I think, going to have some different influences of new stuff, whether it's DJ Reed as an outside corner, something they haven't done in years past, going to some more 3-4 fronts on earlier downs. I think they improvise a little bit here, but at the core, they want to be that Seattle 3 defense, that Legion of Boom scheme that they've tried to continuously replicate here, and I don't see that changing a ton. And I think the signing of an Ahkello Witherspoon and Pierre Desir indicates that they want to get back to more of that lengthy press man corner style. Then you have the home field is elite. It is tied for first in the NFL. I still want to go to a game out there and experience the 12s, but there's no denying that getting home field advantage is actually something that could alone elevate this defense from, I don't know, what was 27th, 28th last year to maybe 23, 24 this year. Weird COVID season last year. The Seahawks might be a team that benefits more than most as far as defensive performance with how loud and epic that home field is. And then just a recap of the team as a whole. 9th overall, 7th on offense, up towards the top, 22nd defense. Special teams is very sound here. They always are. Good kicker. Good is an understatement. Jason Myers, Michael Dixon, one of the better kicker-punter duos there. Great coverage unit. They have the depth to cover kicks and all that stuff. The culture kind of smack dab with where their ranking is. They've lost a little bit of that it factor and a little bit of that benefit of the doubt over the last few years, but still a top culture. I think Pete Carroll, for all of his knocks about the style and the scheme and all that stuff, he still creates a really good top 10 culture here for the Seattle Seahawks. One last look at the strengths and weaknesses now before we get to the schedule. Russell Wilson alone is a strength. If everything hits the fan here, you at least have a quarterback that can improvise and really put the team on his back. And then you add on top of the fact that they are now putting a scheme in place that should be able to provide some much more consistency and down-to-down structure for this offense that could look beautiful here. You have playmakers on offense with those receivers. You have an excellent linebacking core, which I would just say elevates the floor of the defense because you have a guy in Bobby Wagner who doesn't just have good sideline-to-sideline speed to prevent some big runs, but also just makes sure everybody's in the right spot and can reduce the amount of coverage busts you have, which is going to increase the floor by reducing the amount of big plays that you allow through coverage busts. And then the culture is still very good here. But then they also have some pretty defined weaknesses here. I'm still very worried about their line play in general. The offensive line, from a traditional sense, is going to struggle in pass protection. I think the scheme with some of the moving pockets can reduce some of that stuff. But if this team does get into shootouts and does have to kind of drop off of the plan A with the play action boot game, when they get into shootouts, I do worry about this team's pass protection in a traditional sense of the word. And then you pair that with a strong lack of traditional pass rush. It's going to make this team very matchup dependent. to the point that they're going to be at a noticeable disadvantage against teams with really nice line play. And then the cornerback room is a clear question mark. We don't even know who the go-to starters are for this team at this point in time, and we don't know if those starters, when they win those jobs, are going to be able to keep those jobs. So it's a real question mark in the secondary. At least they have good safeties. But now the schedule, Las Vegas has them as a 9.5 win team, and I'm going over for this team with a 10-7 prediction at this point in time. Now remember, guys, I will be doing a final season's prediction video a week before the season starts, and a full playoff prediction as well. So just keep that in mind and subscribe so that you don't miss that when we do it. But here's the schedule as we sit here today. Another team that benefits from getting Indianapolis early, potentially without Wentz and Quentin Nelson. And then a tough stretch after that. You got Tennessee and the Rams at home, and you got to go on the road to Minnesota, San Francisco, at Pittsburgh. Ooh, that's going to be tough. I do have them going 3-3 there, but it's certainly not ideal. The second half of their season, however, was a little easier than I expected, given that they have a first-place schedule and are also in the hardest division in football. But they get New Orleans and Jacksonville at home before the bye week, so they can straighten some things out, get to 5-3, and then I have them at 5-4 for the second half there, with some tough road losses at Green Bay, at Washington, at the Rams, at Arizona, but they do get at Houston. It's a nice gift for them to prepare for the home stretch there, and then beating Arizona and San Francisco, Chicago, and Detroit at home. So I have them just over 9.5 wins, and competing, obviously, in this NFC West or NFC Best. That's kind of nice. We get the NFC Best and the NFC Least this year. But as far as Super Bowl goes, I don't personally have Super Bowl futures on this team. I think they're at like 18-1 last time I checked. I do believe this offense has a great year, and maybe the bet would be Russell Wilson MVP this year. But as far as the defense being good enough in the playoffs against an Aaron Rodgers, against the Rams, and against the Bucs, they probably have to beat 2 of those 3 teams. I don't know. I don't know if this defense has the talent to hang and consistently beat those teams. So I don't personally have Super Bowl bets. Can I picture them winning the Super Bowl with Russell Wilson as their quarterback in an MVP season? I guess I can envision it, but I don't think it's not exactly my pick at this point in time. So that's going to do it for the Seahawks deep dive. Excited to hear your guys' thoughts on this one. Do you think 9 is too high, too low, just right for the power ranking? Also, what'd you think of the breakdown on the team? I hope you enjoyed regardless, and if you did, please do hit that like button, subscribe, tell your friends about the show as well if you think they'd enjoy. That would also help. It's going to be a slightly longer period before the next deep dive. I'm going to be out of town from Wednesday to Tuesday, so we're going to have to space it out a little bit. But until the next deep dive, guys, cheers. We'll see you then.